Okay, thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Seneca County IDA. So we are here because we have contracted MRB and its consulting team to put together some concepts for the future reuse of the Willard campus. So before we kick this off, I just want to thank a few folks that are here tonight. We have a few IDA board members in the room, quite a few members of the Willard Task Force. Those are the folks wearing the blue lanyards. So if you're looking for any insights or have questions on the campus and this process, they are really the ones that you should go to, aside from obviously our consulting team who's sitting here in the front. They also have lanyards on. So thank you to all of you for coming out. Just want to mention a couple housekeeping points. So we are recording this presentation tonight. This will be shared on our website after this, so SenecaCountyIDA.org. We will also share all of the other materials that you'll be reviewing tonight. So for those that aren't able to make it, or if you want to come back and reference this later, you can do so there. And then just a couple of reminders for you all. So the goal of this process has been to be collaborative and to engage with the community. We want to continue to do so. So keep in mind that the things you're going to see tonight from the consulting team are in draft form. The purpose of this was to take all of the input that you came and shared at our first public input session and all of the other expertise that the consulting team brings to the table to put forward what would be the most likely positive uses for the future of Willard. So we welcome your feedback, both positive and negative, and we want to make sure that you continue to be engaged in this process, because what you see tonight is not necessarily the final of how it's going to be. This is really a tool for the community as a whole to shape and share its vision for the future. So with that, I will turn it over to the team. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm Mike Lindolo. I met many, but probably not all of you at Open House number 1. I'm the Director of Economic Development for MRB Group. We were hired by the IDA to undertake the study. I just want to introduce a couple other members of my team so you're aware of them. Jim Tripp is our architect from MRB Group. Sam Gordon is from EDR, who helped with the stakeholder engagement and some of the landscape architecture. And Jennifer Aaron from Barrow Architecture, who's helping us with the historic preservation aspects of this project. There's a couple other people out in the hallway. Tracy is the project manager. She should really be here because she's doing the project, but she's very kindly staying out in the hallway to greet people that are coming in late. Not late, that are coming in at this point. So it's good to see everybody out here. It was certainly a very successful open house number 1 in our view. We had a lot of people, we had a lot of interest, a lot of discussions, a lot of passion out there. And I thought that was wonderful to see that not every community has that level of engagement. Sometimes we have meetings and only a handful of people show up. And we're talking to 1/100th of 1% of the population. So it's good to see a lot of folks out tonight. Sarah gave us a good introduction here. I will just say again, the IDA hired us. Our team members are listed there, MRB Group, EDR, HRP Associates, which is not represented tonight. They had done an environmental assessment at the campus, and that was helpful. And then Barrow Architecture. The Willard Task Force members are listed here, and I know they have the blue lanyards on, but if you wouldn't mind just standing up, please, if you're on the task force, just so people can see you, in case anybody wants to ask any questions or blame you for our work. So, all right, thank you. You may sit down. So first, a background, and most people in this room know this, but it is really important to frame what we're doing tonight. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit. Back in 2010, 2011, the state started a round of prison closures. They did another round in 2014, and then unfortunately, in 2022, they closed the Willard Drug Treatment Center. I'm sorry, 2023. And what had happened in the interim since those closures was disappointing, which means to say, by and large, for the most part, the the prisons that were closed and stayed unused and started deteriorating. There was a precious few examples of successful reuse. Why? Well, they're hard properties to reuse, but I think more importantly, and I'm sure my consulting team would agree with me, they were in the state's hands, right? And the state doesn't necessarily have, not that any of them are wrong or bad, but they don't necessarily have your interest in getting this thing moving right now, right? So why are we doing this study? Well, most important is to, if this study is successful, get local control over the facility. That doesn't guarantee its reuse, but that's the first step and a very important step. So Sarah mentioned that you're going to see some preliminary some preliminary uses tonight. All of what we're leading to is not for us to decide exactly how the site's going to be redeveloped. It's to convince the state, hey, we have a plan. We know what we're doing. Please let us take control of the campus so that we can redevelop it, okay? That's really important to know because tonight and in the open house, we're not gonna decide which buildings we're gonna save. We're not gonna decide which uses get placed there. We're not gonna decide how it's gonna look. We're gonna take your input, we're gonna build it into a plan, and we're gonna give it to the state, right? And that plan is gonna be somewhat vague because we want it to be. As we develop further, we want to be able to have some flexibility there. So, that last bullet point up here, we want to leave you with an actionable plan that you can take to advance the next few steps, and we're going to give you the next few steps as well at the end of the presentation. So here's the timeline, and I apologize for the small font for the folks in the back, but you know, for anybody who hasn't been following it, we had the kickoff in March. We had some preliminary engineering done from March to September, some of the architecture. We visited the site, the whole group of us visited the site, did a 4-hour walk around. It was a long time. And then a number of our crew have been back several times to go back and look. We did the market analysis. We had the July 10th public engagement session. And in September, we did this conceptual master plan. And that's the key, conceptual. You'll hear me say this over and over. This is a concept that we put together so that you can react to it to us. So that you can tell us, what do you like, what don't you like? I guarantee you, everyone in this room will not like at least one part of this conceptual plan, okay? That's intentional. I'm not trying to provoke you, but we're trying to figure out, okay, look at this. Do you like this part of it? Do you like that part of it? What do you like, what don't you like? All right? Because once we have your feedback, we can come up with a preliminary disposition plan and a financial plan that says, hey, if the community were to take this over, what would you need to look at from a financial point of view in order to get this from the state, get it ready for a developer, and get a developer in there, right? You want to know that before you make any decisions. And then finally, in mid-November, we're going to have a final report and then presentation, I believe, to the board. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleagues to talk about the history of the site and some of the historic preservation aspects of how we looked at the site.
I'm really pleased to be here with all of you and talk to you about the history of the site, because I think the history of the site is really what captures everyone's imaginations and captures everyone's sort of excitement about what the future is going to bring. So I'm going to give a little bit of understanding to you of the history of the site. And the history is a lot more than the dates that you see up there on the screen, and a lot more than the changing names. The history of the site really is based on the people who occupy the site, the patients and the staff, and the evolution of mental health care. And also the people of the community, the local community, and their relationship to the buildings and the people that were housed within and being cared for in that campus of buildings. Mainly, the history is a story of how the people in the community really developed and transitioned over time. Following the Willard Law of 1865, the New York State legislature established a state asylum for the chronic insane in order to provide for better care for the insane poor. And up to the turn of the 19th century, the Willard Asylum had grown to become one of the largest institutions in the United States, encompassing more than 1,100 acres and over 100 buildings. Better care is provided by trained nurses, the beautiful setting overlooking Seneca Lake, where patients had access to sunlight and natural air and ventilation. And they developed skills to become self-sufficient, and it's even based on the humane philosophy that was in the mental health care at the time. And you'll find that really impacted the architecture of the buildings with the sprawling Kirkbride plans that you see at Maples and Edgemere and Pines. Even though they're condemned and in falling down shape, they really capture the imagination. And a lot of you probably remember the Chapin building that was taken down in the 80s. That was really the signature building of the site. Time passes. Then along came the State Care Act of 1890, where the acute and chronic cases came from the entire state, or not from the entire state like before, but really from just the 11 surrounding counties. The facility grew to 3,000 patients by the mid-1900s. It had over 1,000 employees, a nursing school, a farm, and a train depot. Again, changes in the philosophy of mental health care was reflected in the architecture of the buildings. Next slide, please. The 1930s campaign of buildings, Elliott Hall, North and South Home, Seneca Home, they really were based on care of patients in a ward model, not in individual rooms like the Kirkbride plans. Okay. Time passes even longer. And after World War II, the model of care pushed for mental health care to be really taken in smaller homes and smaller settings. The Willard Psychiatric Center was eventually closed due to budget cuts and declining patient numbers. Then in came the New York State Department of Corrections, developing a drug treatment campus where half the facilities were then used for a low-level parole program. They fenced in about 110 acres of the site. Existing buildings were used for the people in the drug treatment program, but also for training and administration. But many buildings were left vacant and neglected. Time passes, and now you as the community is faced with more changes as the drug treatment center changed. There are over 75 buildings on the campus, buildings of varying historic character, varying building type, uses, in varying states of repair, and that's evident when you see them. Existing buildings, where was I? From sheds and garages to educational buildings to housing, into community gathering spaces, there's a lot of potential looking into the future. The community's involvement, all of you, particularly in this phase, is very important to help with that sort of evolution that has happened through time at the Willard site. Now, history is also buildings, and as an architect, a preservation architect, I'm particularly interested in the buildings, and Jim Tripp is the architect from MRB. We visited this site multiple times, went through many buildings, tried not to remember the scary stories, but we went through many buildings and went through them with a critical eye, looking at the infrastructure of the buildings, where the windows were placed, how was the roof, looking at it with an aesthetic eye. What could be a community gathering place? Is this a welcoming place? How could these buildings be repurposed? So we worked to identify with the team buildings that could have the potential for reuse in time, and also hold the character of the site, hold that history that everybody finds so dear, and really looking at the buildings as resources both to the site and to the community and to future developments.
And I think one of the things to pair off of Jennifer's comments, talking to the community, I'm usually loud at that meeting. There's over 1 million square feet of building inventory here. I don't know if
Oh, we can't hear you.
can't hear me.
Here.
How about now?
Yes.
There's about 1 million square feet of building inventory on the campus. That's a lot of building inventory. A lot of it is very similar in nature. A lot of it, as Jennifer mentioned, we looked at as what could be reused. And several of these buildings that you see up there that we've kind of pointed out, we said these are buildings that seem to be in a condition and have layouts and character that could potentially be reused in these ideas that you're going to see in concepts later on. That doesn't mean that every building up here is going to be preserved. That doesn't mean that every building that doesn't have its photograph is going to be removed. It's just as we're developing this plan and looking at character and how it could be reused, these are ones that kind of rose up with areas of the site and potential redevelopment.
So part of this process, we're kind of reporting back to you, what have we heard today, what have we learned today as part of this process of evaluation? Some of the things we heard was from you, or from those of you who have participated in the first open house or provided input online to date. So we've heard comments in a variety of different categories, but I think one of the most important things we've heard, or one of the areas of importance that we've heard from you, is the historic nature of this campus. And that's part of the reason why we're really looking at this and wanting to better understand the history and the context of the buildings that remain today. So you'll see that as we've started to put together this conceptual plan, we're listening to those thoughts. And we're thinking about what buildings could we incorporate into a future redevelopment of the campus. You'll see that in the master plan. We've also heard that it's really important that there are things that are incorporated into this project that are open to the community. Right? We don't just want this to be some private redevelopment where there's no public access, for example. So we understand that people want things like making sure that there is access to the lake. And we're thinking about how do we make sure that that is part of a future plan and vision for this property. There's also, I think, ideas about what kind of recreational opportunities might be able to be incorporated in the campus that again could be open to the community. And I know, not to pick up one idea, but someone just came in earlier and said, I really wish there was a pool on this campus that was open to the community. So that's another idea we could explore and see how that fits. And then I think the environment issue, I see this in a couple different ways. One is maybe a little bit more continuing the recreation theme, if you think about maybe a dog park, for example. But it's also, this is an amazing natural asset. And there are some, the creek that runs through the property and the topography and the forested areas and the waterfront. We want to make sure that those things are not harmed by this, and perhaps the future vision either enhances or takes advantage of those natural assets. So those are things that we're looking at in the preliminary concept. And lastly, there are some particular buildings that we've heard are very, very important, right? So we're, again, trying to make sure that those are part of the vision. We're thinking about how do those really, really important buildings fit into this future vision. And lastly, ensuring, I know across upstate, and across the state, and even across the country, we're experiencing issues with affordable housing. So how do we keep that at the forefront of this vision and make sure that whatever is done can help in some way to address that larger community concern? So this is just another way of kind of looking at what we heard you say. So there was a dot exercise, and we asked folks to put a dot next to the words that really kind of spoke to them. And then we entered those into a program that created this word cloud so that we could see, what are the things, for example, the waterfront. We can see here, that's really important, right? So we're thinking about how do we take advantage of that. Senior assisted living facilities, how does that get incorporated into the vision? How do we look at the existing historic structures on the campus and make sure that those are rehabilitated and made part of the future vision? Things like affordable housing, a community center, looking at walkability. How do we, for example, make sure that this proposed vision enhances or connects to the hamlet of Willard? And we do think that there are some really strong opportunities to do that. This is just to say we're listening and we're paying attention. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael because he's been working on the market analysis, which you'll see kind of dovetails with some of the things that we've heard today.
Is this on? All right, good. So we have a second one. All right, so the market analysis. I'm kind of the numbers guy, a financial guy, so this is the way I look at it. We have our historic folks, our architectural folks, our community planners. I look at it from the dollars and cents point of view, right? So we looked at a wide range of potential uses. And when I say potential uses, I'm referring to the uses that are private sector uses, not the community uses, not like the public waterfront, right? So you can see on the industrial side, and people say, industrial, why industrial? Well, wine manufacturing is an industrial process, right? So it's not, we're not saying an industrial process that is unsuitable for this site. We're saying something that is suitable for that. So we looked at food and beverage, dairy manufacturing, beverage manufacturing, of course, craft beverage manufacturing, printing, warehouse and storage. Those are some of the uses, not all of them that we looked at. Warehousing is one that's in huge demand right now across the entire state. This isn't the perfect location for it, for sure, because of access to the interstate, but it is one option. We think that the best industrial use at this site is going to be a food and beverage manufacturing use, if any. The next category is in the accommodation, food service, and entertainment. The obvious one here is travel accommodation, because you're in the wine trail country, you're in the lakes country, people want to come here, they want to spend time here. There isn't necessarily a significant overnight accommodation in this immediate area that would be able to accommodate folks. Amusement and recreation, because we want to look at where are there opportunities to draw more people into Willard that might not otherwise come here. We need kind of a destination to go on there. And everybody loves restaurants and bars, right? So we wanted to include at least some look at that. Healthcare and social assistance. For some reason, dentists came up. I'm not sure why, but it looked like there was a significant gap there. Vocational rehabilitation services, and then a whole host of other health practitioners. What's not on the slide is also, we looked at this from, is there a possibility for a continuing care retirement community type of model, right? And that's where you go in to senior housing, independent living, assisted living, and then skilled nursing care or nursing home or memory care type of unit, right? So you have kind of a whole range of things into there. It's not listed on the slide because it kind of mixes between housing and healthcare. So housing is one that has come up a tremendous amount all over upstate New York. I'm sure folks are aware of the governor's initiative around this. This is not just on affordable housing, this is housing really of all types. We are underhoused right now, believe it or not. And so the data certainly supported that in the Seneca County market and in certainly around the Willard market as well. We have quite a few seasonal and occasional use houses. I'm sure you guys are aware of that phenomenon, which is putting some more pressure on your housing in particular for folks that are not seasonal residents. There's a very low inventory for homes for sale, and there's a metric called days on market, which is how long a house is on the market, and then how much inventory you have. And you guys have a very, very low inventory, which means to say you only have about a month, I think it was a month and a half, or 2 months of supply, right, on market. So if someone wants to come and buy, it'd be hard for them to find. Multifamily, there's not a ton of multifamily units in the area, but the ones that are here have very low vacancy, which means to say there's probably a very strong demand for multifamily, and that multifamily goes the whole range, you know? People sometimes have a negative perception about what multifamily is, but we're talking about the whole rate, market rate, luxury product, lower scale product, the whole thing. And then of course, affordable housing and workforce housing, which kind of get lumped together, and people get confused about what we mean by that. Typically we say workforce housing kind of runs at the 80% EMI, which is area median income. So if your household earns about 80%, you're in the moderate income range. Low income usually is 60% and below. So you really need both. And we looked at the stats, and you have need across all of these different tranches. So all of those things are things that could potentially work. So what Sam and his team did was they took all of these uses and we said, hey, we need to represent this visually for the public because I'm a numbers guy and I'm a word guy, but a lot of people want to see, what does this look like? Am I going to like this? Is this something that I want to see when I drive down Main Street or if I drive through the campus? So a number, not quite all of these uses, but many of these uses, we picked and we divided the site up into different areas and we said, why don't we try this use here, see what it looks like, and this use here, this use here. Don't get caught up when you look at this map about what use is where. It's more about, look at the use. Do you like this use? Does this use appear appropriate? Now, obviously, some of the uses have to be on the waterfront, like public access, right? We can't put it at the top of the hill. But to some extent, it's also like you could interchange one type of development here and there, and you'll see the different areas, which Sam is going to present in just a second here. And then finally, on the map, just be real careful that Jim and Jennifer presented earlier the historic structures that are prioritized for rehabilitation. We're not showing that in these concepts. We're just showing the concepts in each of these areas. So don't focus on, hey, this is on the footprint of this building that we're trying to save. Yeah, we're looking at this from a conceptual point of view, not an actual buildable point of view, right? The developer, if we can get one, is going to be looking at it and telling us what the developer can do. So I think that, Sam, I think I hand it off to you for this.
This is still on.
Yes.
And it could be a developer, or it could be multiple different developers, right? So, I found if I don't put it on airplane mode, and my wife calls, it will ring. I don't want that to happen. Can you see that laser? Can you see the red? Yeah, okay. Barely? I might have to point. Okay. All right, I'm gonna get up here. Okay, so we've said this multiple times, but I'm gonna say it again, and it says it right down here, too. This is a concept. There is nothing on here that is set in stone. It makes it kind of difficult when we make a picture of it, because then you're like, oh, it's gotta be real. But it's really not. What's real about it is we've listened to the community, we understand what some of the things are that you'd like to see. We have visited the site, we understand the existing conditions on the site, we understand the infrastructure that's on the site. We also understand the topography and the natural system. So we've gotten to know this site. And what we're trying to show now, we also know the market forces. We understand the market conditions. So what we're trying to show is how do all those different things come together, potentially, on this site. Now, just a reminder, there is a map out in the lobby that has all the same information on it, and it will also be available online. So if, after tonight you think, oh, I really wish I could look at that again, you will be able to and provide additional feedback after you've had a chance to look at it. So we have essentially broken down the campus into 7 different areas. And I'm just going to hit the highlights because you'll be able to look at the map out there and then you'll have some additional time afterwards. So, number 1, this is an area that's right along Seneca Lake, if we orient ourselves. This is Seneca Lake. Let's see. You see that? That's Willard Road. Main Street's up here. We have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street in the hamlet of Willard. And do you say Bonavista? Is that right? Bonavista. Okay, Bonavista at the golf course. And we have Simpson Creek. Right? These are some of the most important features of this site, just to orient us. So based on our analysis and some dialogue with the advisory committee and the task force, and thinking about, all right, here's what we heard, here's what the market data is telling us, what do we think? So we think that there's potential along the waterfront here to create a resort type community. The resort community would have access to the lakefront, perhaps have its own marina, for example. There's existing water and wastewater facilities that could feed this facility. It's also adjacent, sort of semi-adjacent to the Bonavista golf course. And our understanding is, at one point in history, the golf course, there was some thought about expanding the golf course, right? So that's something maybe in conjunction with a resort facility, maybe the golf course could expand. And if not, maybe there's some opportunity to take advantage of this adjacent land. Maybe that becomes cross-country skiing in the winter or recreational trails that also connect along Simpson Creek. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the Simpson Creek Gorge. And as we heard you say, people are very interested in making sure that we're protecting the natural systems and the natural landscape. So that's just what we're thinking would be done. Perhaps there's some opportunities to create trail connectivity on either side of Simpson Creek. This resort could have trail access along it, for example, and the development up here could also have access along the creek. There's, lots of different ideas and things that could happen. So maybe there's some sort of adventure ropes course here. I mean, there's lots of kind of adventure tourism, maybe mountain biking. There's other things that could happen along here if we think about the recreation opportunities. If we look at number 3, this is where we're conceiving that there would be the public access to the water that folks are talking about. And we know that the pier that we talked about just a few moments ago was in this area, and we are thinking you could recreate that experience so that people do have access to the waterfront. There are some inherent challenges to this. There are some steep slopes. So for example, we're thinking that access would actually be from here to get down to the waterfront, a primary access point for the public. Just to show you that we're thinking about how all these things come together, including the topography and the existing conditions. Number 4, this is where there's quite a few different buildings that we heard from you that these are really important buildings, right? So when we get to this number 4, if you see the lighter color buildings, those are actually existing buildings that we're thinking those could remain as part of this concept. And then what we would do is start to build these darker color buildings are new construction or infill construction that would happen around that. So this portion of the concept is really about creating that walkable, kind of more urban, mixed-use, maybe small village environment that we heard you talk about, right? And just to orient you, the white, so these are existing buildings that would remain in concept. These are infill, new construction. Wherever you see white, those are parking lots. Right? Then number 5 is more of a residential neighborhood. So think single-family homes on smaller lots with connectivity to the existing Willard hamlet. So we're looking at extending 1st Street, 2nd Street, 3rd Street into this site. So it becomes, you have now development on both sides of Main Street, and it starts to feel like a walkable neighborhood where you can cross over Main Street, have access to both sides. When we get to number 6, again, the lighter color are existing buildings that we are suggesting might remain as part of the overall concept. This area, we're thinking there's an opportunity for some sort of educational or institutional facility. Now, what that is exactly, I actually live in the Syracuse area, and recently there was a closure of Casanova College. One of the things that they're looking at for Casanova College is a private boarding school. And they have started to look at that market. So that could be one example of what might happen here. And I'm sure there's lots of other ideas of what that could be, but that's just to give you kind of a thought. So this is more, we're thinking of kind of an institutional, some sort of educational campus that would remain here. Then when we get to number 7, this is an area where there's a lot of back and forth. I think there's a lot of different options. What we've illustrated is one option. As you look at what we say, one thing is there could be an adaptive reuse of Grandview, and that could be a resort or a hotel venue. And there could also be, this could also be, alternatively, like an agritourism facility. Think of, maybe it's a winery with a restaurant, or it could be a distillery, or some sort of brewery and with a restaurant. So they may be actually producing their own hops or growing grapes. And so you have that agricultural landscape, but it's also an agricultural business that's bringing folks in from outside. We've also thought about maybe this residential neighborhood that we're showing here could extend out further. And you'll see that this also says single-family homes. So that's another option. So I think that's pretty much a good overview of what we're thinking and what's in the concept. As you read it, you'll get a little bit more detail because we've looked at a lot of different things. There's a lot of words here, but it doesn't make sense for me to cover them all. Are there any big questions that you all have? Yes?
You said apartments and continuing care were a couple of major potential uses. Where would they
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right, so for example, this mixed-use area that I was talking about, that's where those apartments would be or could be. Also, an alternative for this institutional area could be a senior housing facility or some sort of lifestyle facility. Well, there's different options. It's a good question. I didn't cover that, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Do you give any plans for low-income housing?
So the question is, do we have any specific plans for low-income housing? So we don't have specific plans, but there are places where that could happen within this overall concept. So just like the gentleman here asked, you talked about apartments, where would they go, right? So any of the different housing types that we're showing could have an affordability component, right? So there could be, for example, affordable units that are part of this walkable neighborhood area. There could be affordable single-family units, and there could be affordable housing that's incorporated in that institutional campus area, or if it's senior housing, for example, there could be an affordability component to that. What that looks like exactly is really a detail that has to be worked out through the process. You know, how many units, where they're going, where does the financing, there's a lot of details to make that all happen. Any other big questions? Yes, sir. I heard dialogue with what university? Oh, Cornell. Yeah.
What it could be used for, or they may even want to participate.
To my knowledge, there has not been a dialogue with Cornell to date.
I confirm that, there hasn't been one. Although it fit very nicely with the origin of the facility, right? Certainly.
Yeah, there hasn't been, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be or there won't be, right? It's a good idea. Yeah. There's a few others. Yes, sir.
So far, has your study included some version of interaction with state government to align any of this plan with priorities of the government and where New York State is currently investing? Property is, after all, owned by the state, correct?
Yes, it's owned by the state. Did everybody hear the question? So the question, if I could rephrase it, you tell me if I'm wrong, was to what extent have we consulted or aligned these with state priorities that could make them presumably available for funding or in support of the state's efforts? Is that a good way to say it? Okay. So what I can say about that is we are keenly aware that we're going to need assistance to move this property. And in order to move this property, we are going to have to be at least somewhat aligned with those priorities. So when I say move the property, I mean both get local control of the facility, but also funding for redevelopment purposes. So when you talk about housing, that's huge priority, right? Craft beverage is another one, for example. Industrial development, certainly another one. And preservation. Those are all priorities of the state. So we would certainly, we're certainly attuned to it in terms of putting together a proposal that the state's gonna like, and then hopefully the state's gonna fund. And this is a little premature to say it, but I'm gonna say it anyhow. We have had conversations with a number of agencies, including ESD, Empire State Development Corporation. They're the folks that would ultimately help facilitate the transfer, even though it's owned by Department of Corrections. In previous prison closure rounds, the state has provided transition funding. There isn't any on the table right now. They are attempting to work towards that. So it's certainly our hope that something is going to be available in the state, but we have no details at this point. We've also talked to the equivalent agency at the federal level and asked them about assistance for development, and have had a positive response back in terms of eligibility with respect to commercial development and the ability for that to be a fundable activity on site if we get a developer and an end business.
I was wondering, because I know our tax dollars, taxpayer in New York State here in Oakland, which of the New York State agencies or groups, like New York State Historic Preservation, New York State Economic Development, New York State Tourism, which of these are all talking to each other? Where does most of the funding come from?
So from a funding point of view, so there's several different agencies. I don't think we'll get anything from corrections. Like, that's just not part of their deal. I mean, I'm not casting aspersions like that, but ESD, Empire State Development, is the Department of Development. They're the ones that are most likely going to be able to run the funding related to this. So there's several programs that we're certainly looking at. I'm sure, have folks heard of Restore New York? Okay, so we've been very successful in the past at getting Restore New York. In fact, in the last round, we got $6.9 million for Newark, related to a series of buildings in the downtown that had some issues. That would be an excellent source of funding. We also hope that there's a prison transition fund, again, as I mentioned earlier, that would presumably also be run by ESD. And then there's a whole bunch of other agencies, the alphabet soup agencies, right? If we're looking at different kinds of housing, there's different types of programs at DHCR, Department of Homes and Community Renewal, right? So they might come in for that bit. ESD might come in if we get a beverage manufacturer, because they have a small program for equipment, but they also have larger programs for larger capital improvements. And there's a few other state agencies, like Department of State. We're proposing a public use up at number 3 there. There are parks monies and local waterfront revitalization program funds that potentially could go towards something like that. Part of that financial plan step that we have listed is going to identify some of these funding sources and what we know about them today.
I've got 2 more questions and then I'll be quiet. Seth Kircher, local resident of Ovid. Many of the ideas for reuse focus on redevelopment building. I'd be interested in knowing if in that ideation there was any pause to understand what we're up against in terms of Native American encumbrances. Also, Babcock Covey is up for sale. You put the 2 properties together, that space is the size of Central Park. Is there any discussion of essentially what could become if we brought those 2 properties together to do something? Thank you.
I'm going to hand this off to Sam in just a second, but one thing I neglected to mention is there's a few connections that are proposed with this facility, and you can just barely see it. It's hard to see in the very top left. There's, at the blue, there's a green arrow pointing up right there. We want to connect that up with Sampson, and there's a trail that runs not too far from that point, and then obviously southward down the shorefront to connect to Babcock. We did not contemplate Babcock specifically in our reuse. We have enough to deal with. We have a huge site and almost a million square feet of building to deal with already. Did you want to say anything? No, okay. Any other questions? Yes, I'm gonna run it over to you. Oh, you. Yes, all right.
I have a really silly question, but is this going to be state run, or is the state funding this, or is it going to be private sector, or a mix?
So the state owns it right now. Our work is specifically to wrest it from the control of the state so that we have the ability to do something with it. I'm going to answer your second question about private developers later when we get to next steps, because I don't want to jump ahead too much. But there's definitely going to be an important step there that's a little bit further down the line. Are any questions? Oh, all right, we have a lanyard wearing question here.
Hi, Joe Borster, the town supervisor. I just wanted to allude to Babcock Covey for a little bit. A few months ago, the Senate County Board of Supervisors voted to work with state parks to take over Babcock Covey to operate it as a state park. We're in process now. Right now, we're waiting for appraisals to be done by state parks. Everything looks like, so far, it's going to move forward. So in the next 12 to 18 months, Seneca County, through a local development corporation, should be taking on the operations and maintenance of the Camp Babcock Covey as a state park. So part of this could be trails leading from this facility over there. It'd be open to the public. The pool, the 5 miles of trails there, the acres of the Camp Field, everything should be open to the public. What that'll look like, we really don't know yet until we get the authorization, but we are in the process of moving forward on that.
All right, let's move to the next slide. I do want to cover next steps because I know we're a little over the time we anticipated, which is not a big deal. We'll have plenty of time to talk out there, but I feel like some of these conversations are good to have while we're standing in front of boards and we can point to stuff and talk to you individually about it. But there's a really important series of next steps. And one of the things that we want to give you at the end of this process is what are truly the next steps that you need to take. So really flesh some of these things out, okay? So as it's written up there, we need to decide as a community if we're going to take ownership of this, right? And by ownership, both figuratively and literally ownership, right? Are we prepared to do what's necessary to take this control of the property from the state? There's a financial implication of that. We're going to help you understand what that financial implication is, right? Right now, we're preparing some cost estimates and some estimates of the maintenance of the facility until it's developed, and some other things that you need to know. Then, presuming you would want to move ahead, you have to choose an entity, an organization that would be the holder of the land and running the development cycle, right? Not developing the property, but managing the development of the property. Then we take control of the site, and that takes a while, but thankfully, that ground has been broken. Livingston County spent 3-something years, I think, getting control of it because they had to work out all the bugs. I'm not going to get into it. It was very, very complicated. It had to do with taxes and bond financing. But they worked through all those issues on our behalf. And they have just received control of their facility. So I'm anticipating it'll take substantially less time, but in no case will it take less than a year, in my view, right? So once we move forward, we decide what we're going to do. We take about a year to transition the property over. My understanding is that the corrections is going to continue to maintain the property through that period until it's transferred over. Now, what level it's maintained, what improvements are made, we'll see. But our understanding is they're intending to do so. While that's happening, right now our preliminary recommendation is this. Not an RFP, request for a proposal, but an RFEI, request for expressions of interest. We take everything that the consultant team has done, and we said, here's our concept, here's the financial pitch, here's what we know about the historic buildings, here's what we know about the contributions of the various parties of the scheme and everything like that. We say, we give them the map or whatever it is, and we say, we want your comment. development community. We send it out and we say, look, development community, what do you like about this concept? What don't you like about this concept? What would induce you to want to come to our community to redevelop this? Are you interested in a piece of it? Are you interested in the whole thing? What would you need in order to do your project at our site, right? That's going to give us some real-time, concrete information, number one. And number two, it's going to help market the site while this is happening, right? Maybe getting somebody, or hopefully several parties, interested in something a little bit more, to dip their toes a little bit deeper. So once the transition happens, then our recommendation, next steps, is develop that full RFP. Now you're not asking for information, you're asking for people to propose what they're going to do at the site, right? If I take control of the site, private developer says, I will do this, I need these things from this community and that community, and I need these kinds of assistance to move forward, and this is what my phasing in, this is what my plan is. And you, as a community, look at those different proposals, and again, hopefully you get one, hopefully you get five, right? And you choose the best one of it. It's not the low bidder or the high bidder, right? We're not gonna do it by money. We're gonna do it by what are the community impacts, presuming that the proposer is competent, right? You know, can actually pull off the project. We would select somebody based on the merits, not on just some arbitrary number that they're bidding for, right? Part of that process, you have to decide, what are we willing to do as the two towns and the county and the IDA and the LDC and whoever else is involved in the state, right? You take all these development proposals, again, hopefully you get a bunch, and you decide what you're gonna do, and then you transfer those out. Now there's a myriad of different ways that this could happen: a single developer, multiple developers, a master developer, individual developers, parcel it off, keep the public space separately, subdivide the property. We don't have to decide that tonight, but this is the general framework, right? We make the case, if we want to, we make the case to the state transfers. While they're doing it, we're gathering some more information. We put this out with some criteria in an RFP, we get it back, and if we're lucky enough to get good proposals, we select the group that wants to, and we start working with them to develop this. This is a multi-year process, but this is the first step. So, with that, there, barring any other comments from anybody or any other burning questions, I would recommend, I will allow a few questions, but we'll go out and we can do individual conversations in front of the boards.
Just one quick question. The whole process there assumes that the state of New York will transition the property over to local. Is that a known fact?
We do not know if the state's going to do it. Our understanding is the state wants to do it. It's a liability for them right now. If someone's willing to take a liability from you, you have a reason to want to get rid of it, right? The state, presumably. But that's no guarantee, right? I mean, there's plenty of prisons that are still closed and in the hands of the state. So, no guarantees. We understand that they want these properties redeveloped, and I can understand why they would want to redevelop. I think the bigger question is not, will they sell the property? Will they? But they're not even going to sell it. They're going to give it. Are they going to back it with any money to help us get in there and do things like hazardous material abatement, right? Get it ready for development. So take care of some of that risk.
Is this property totally within the town of Romulus, or is it part of the town of Willard?
It's split. The question is if it's in both towns. It's split between the two towns. So there's a line. Well, we're not looking at the map. There's a line above the line is in Romulus, below the line's in Willard. So, and there's a question about zoning and. Oh, thank you. Well, right, there's the line. The question about zoning comes up sometimes. Romulus has zoning, Ovid doesn't, and so we would only have to worry about zoning on one side of that line. But it's certainly a concern. It's not this bullet point because it's just too detailed, but one of the things we recommend is once you get the property and you're a little further along, you do this funny thing called the GEIS, it's more acronyms, Generic Environmental Impact Statement, and you basically kind of pre-plan it and get seeker. I mean, who knows what seeker is? Get rid of seeker fairly up front that de-risks things for development. So, did you have a Yes, so there's two elements of this. One is whether or not there's an environmental contamination on the site, and thankfully that appears to be very minor. HRP, which is one of our consultants, had done a phase 1 environmental statement and a phase 2, and it came back relatively clean. So we're not so much worried about like a petroleum spill or something in the ground or PCBs. What we're really worried about is asbestos, lead, radon, all that kind of stuff in the buildings. And so, at a minimum, I would hope the state would at least fund the abatement of hazardous material, right? Hazardous building material, like asbestos-containing material in particular. That's a big number. And I think it's part of a reasonable ask from a decommissioning. They built this thing, right? You can't leave it with hazardous material, hazardous building material. All right, with that, you're all excused. Thank you very much for your time. We see you in, nobody got the merits. We'll see you in the open house, and I'm looking forward to some good conversations. Thank you.
We can't leave yet.